Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. Lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. And tonight we're talking about a subject that is very, very important and often misrepresented in history books. And it's basically the early history of South Africa, and with a focus on the Boers and what happened with their history. Because of the complexity of this history, we've decided to run two parts of this live stream. So part one is tonight. We're going to talk about when the Boers first arrived in South Africa, their interaction with the Nguni Bantu people, a whole lot of stuff related to that. And then part two will be actually getting more into the Boer War and all the ramifications of the differences between the Afrikaners and the Boers. Before bringing our guest on, I just want to ask you all to please keep Liz Austin's husband in your thoughts and prayers. He has been sick and has not been well, but I'm sure that soon he'll be fine. Alrighty, let's get into tonight's live stream. Here we go. Hi Hans, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we're going to be talking about the untold history of the Boer nation, the Boer people. And before we get into that, perhaps we should look at how did the Boers arrive in South Africa. Do you want to give us a bit of the background to where they came from in Europe and why they left Europe and how they landed up in the Cape?
Hi, good morning, Scott, and thanks for having me on your live stream. Yes, you know, the background of the Boers, I think is very well known all over, unlike the history of the Boers, which afterwards was not so clear and a little bit murky. The Boers, the term Boer actually originated from Belgium. It was written B-O-O-R, and they were staying in the Netherlands, mostly Belgium area, and also the rest of Holland. And they were mostly agriculture people, and that's why the term Boer, which later on meant in South Africa, the meaning was attached to a farmer. So these people were mostly, like I said, agricultural people and very religious people. And those were the times in the 60s 1600s, 1700s actually, where these people were mostly oppressed by the Roman Catholic Church, and they were mostly Protestants. So, with the recalling of the Edict of Nantes, I hope I pronounced that properly, the field was actually open for them to be seriously oppressed by the Roman Catholic Church. And gradually they decided to look for a place elsewhere to stay and settle. And it just happened like that, excuse me, the Dutch were a very rich country at the time, and due to their trading mostly to the east and to the west, and with the founding of a VOC, was actually called the Oost-Indische Compagnie, which was very rich and contributed a lot to the Dutch economy, and they had trading ships.
Can I just say, Hans, that VOC is actually the Dutch East India Company. And
Correct, yeah.
They were the most, they were the wealthiest business in the world at the time. They were like the Rothschilds of the time. Yeah, back to you.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Yeah. With some murky business as well.
Yes.
If I can call it that. But we won't go into the details of their conduct at this stage in time. But yes, so the Dutch people, Holland, was actually flourishing at the time due to these trading companies in place. We had a lot of ships, and that provided opportunity to these Boer people to travel all around the world and to make a choice to where they want to settle.
Yeah.
So it developed in that way that they decided to come to South Africa.
Sorry, Hans, just again, because a bit of context to the Dutch East India Company. Back in those days, they had these old wooden sailing ships that used to come down from Europe around Africa,
Yes.
and hardly stop it in South Africa. They used to kind of keep on going into Asia, and they had a lot of diseases that happen on the boats, like scurvy and stuff like that, which is as a result of poor nutrition because of the length of the trip. And that's why they decided they would set up basically a base in Cape Town so that supplies could be replenished, and
it was called a refreshment post.
Yeah, refreshment post. Yeah,
it was literally halfway between them and the east, where they actually intended to trade.
Yeah, the spices and stuff. Yeah,
all kind of merchandise. Yeah, so it was convenient, and a lot of Boers. Well, it will actually filter out later that they were not only Boers. There were also another group we call Afrikaners today.
Right.
But say some of a lot of Dutch people, and there's confusion about the fact that most people have a perception that it was predominantly Dutch. They were actually, and I will discuss some figures later on. There were actually almost the same amount of German people who also came on the ship.
Huge amount of people from Central Europe came down. Yeah.
But predominantly they were Dutch and also German. Due to the fact there were a lot of poor people in Germany as well at the time, due to the wars which Germany had prior to that, and even Scandinavian people. But they used this advantage of getting onto the Dutch ships and then coming to South Africa. So it was not only Dutch people, really predominantly Dutch people. And later on, it was the French Huguenots as well. Not many of them, at least about 200. And also in 1820 followed the British settlers.
But going back to 1652, that's when Jan van Riebeeck set up the first official Dutch East India Company base at Cape Town.
Correct, 1652. Yeah. That's right, with Jan van Riebeeck.
And it wasn't set up as a country to capture. It was just, as you said, just a refreshment base for the Dutch East India Company. Yeah. Sorry, back to
correct. It's been even convenient for Sir Francis Drake in the 15th century to stop at the Cape and to
Right.
get fresh water for it. So it's been traditionally known as a base for taking in refreshments. So the Dutch decided to have this refreshment base, and it was never meant to be a country or a annexation or to build a nation.
Yeah.
To put it that way, it was never meant that. That followed, but the initial intention was just for pure trading purposes.
Yeah.
And to make it easier for the ships and more convenient to go on the long route to the east.
Right.
On the trading route.
Okay, so carry on. So let's talk about after 1652. You had this initial group of people who were basically from different parts of Europe who came together, and
yes,
they were originally called the boers.
At start, not really. I think they were called the boers in Europe, mainly in Belgium. The term boer was used. But it's not only the boers who came to South Africa.
Yeah.
Later on, it actually culminated in having two significant groups, which people still until today, or many people, don't want to admit. So it's not really that Afrikaners, as we call them today, or they were called Cape Dutch at the time. It's not that some ships came with Cape Dutch people or Afrikaners and some with boers. They all came together. And maybe at those times they didn't really realize that there's a significant difference between them.
So what is the difference?
The difference? Well, it culminated in one being the biggest enemy of the other.
Why?
Well, I think it's due to their backgrounds, its mentality, its different state of our hearts and ideologies. Maybe we won't really know. Maybe originally, far back, they had different origins. Like it's known today, and it becomes more clear that the Afrikaners are actually Edomites. So that's the latest perception on that. So these people had different opinions about things, different ideologies, like I said, and it started becoming clear after a while of being at the Cape, of working together and staying together.
Yeah.
So that's how it actually, well, some people still deny the fact today, but if you look at what really happened through the history, it started, well, the first polarization became clear with a person by the name of Adam Tas. He was still, during the time of Dutch reign, that this guy Adam Tas, he was part of a movement called Brotherhood, and they decided, that was in the time of the governor Simon van der Stel. They realized and they started complaining about the corruption of this van der Stel government and the way they treated the then called vryburgers. They were granted small farms on which they, because due to the fact that we were really agricultural people and farmers, so they decided this is what they want to do. They want to start farming and then also strengthen the refreshment post, because that was beneficial to the Dutch government, that these farmers started farming and provide produce to the ships. It was convenient and in line with the intention of this setting at the Cape. But as these people started farming, they started being separated from the rest of the then Cape Dutch people, and also the purely Dutch people in the government. There was some separation developing. It's them and us, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And they also started forming solidarity, and they actually realized that they are the same group of people in terms of where they fought and the mentality, like I said, ideologies.
Yeah.
And the first real signs of separation started with Adam Tas who was part of his brotherhood, and he started an uprising. He had a petition signed by many of his Vryburgers, as they were called, the farmers. Also, some of the French Huguenots signed this. And this was long before the British settlers arrived. So it was mainly Dutch, German, and French people, and some from Scandinavia as well. And this is how the separation started, because the Cape Dutch, as we called them later on, Afrikaners, they always they actually were always on the side of the Dutch authorities. So this was the first sign of two groups of people with different ideologies and goals in life.
And that really hasn't changed through the centuries, has it?
No, it hasn't. It hasn't. The next example of this parting was with the Slachters Net Rebellion, and that was during the time of the British government in the Cape.
So that would have been post 1800.
Yeah. That was exactly. It was late 1700s.
So that's when the Brits took over the Cape from the Dutch because of what happened in Europe.
After the British takeover. The British took over the Cape in 1795, when they was in competition with the French of getting control of the Cape. And then for a short while it was given back to Holland.
Yeah.
1802, and it lasted for only 4 years until 1806. And then the Dutch actually requested England, Prince Willem of Orange, he actually requested England to take control of the Cape again, because they were in conflict with France at the time. And then in 1806, England took back, and this time it was actually on request from Holland, and then they took control since 1806 until the end of the Boer War, the third Boer War, which we call the Anglo-Boer War.
You know what I find interesting, Hans, is that I've got some of the very early title deeds which go back to that time for land in the Western Cape, around Cape Town, and they were all in Dutch. The title deeds were written in Dutch, and then you had obviously the person's name and the governor authorizing and so on. But I've got this famous title deed, which was about close to 1820. This is after the British had taken over the Cape, and they were running the Cape, and they were still issuing title deeds in the old Dutch form.
That's very interesting.
And on this title deed is written at the bottom by the governor of the Cape, when are we going to have our own English title deeds written? He actually says that on the title deed. He's so pissed off because they're still in Dutch. Anyway. So we've got this period of time where you've got two groups which are forming, the Afrikaners and the boers, and you've got two which were really basically the superpowers at the time, which were the French and the British, fighting over who owned the Cape, and the British obviously got the Cape, and the reason that happened was because the French basically had the influence over the Dutch. That's how they got control over the Cape during that conflict with what's his name?
You mean Napoleon?
Napoleon. That's it, man. Napoleon Bonaparte. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just had a little brain moment. So you have all these different things happening, and when the British came in, is it true to say that the Boers didn't like the authoritarian attitude of the British governors and the way they acted, so they moved out east towards the Eastern Cape?
It was actually mainly the reason for them to start moving towards the east, and they expanded the eastern frontier all the time.
Yeah.
There were rivers actually forming the boundaries, like the K River and the Fiek River was the final boundary. The main reason for them not enjoying what was happening in the Cape was the slave trade and the strategy of the British with the slaves. The conduct and especially when they decided to free the slaves in 1834. They were not really against the fact that the slaves were freed, but the way it was done. The one day they still had total control over the slaves. They owned the slaves, they bought them, and the next day the slaves were set free. There was no gradual development, and the next day they were all the same, and they had the same rights, and to them that wasn't feasible. It's just the way it was done, which made them unhappy.
Yeah.
And they were not satisfied with that. So then they decided, well, as in early times, like I said, with the matter with Adam Tas, who started this uprising, he was put in jail but freed later on. That was during the Dutch reign, and then the Slachters Neck Rebellion.
Yeah.
That was actually the main areas in which they were very unhappy, and there were other issues, incidents as well. They were in general not happy with British rule. So then they started moving east, expanding their boundaries as farmers, and when the 1820s British settlers arrived, they joined the boers on the eastern frontier, and they farmed together, they defended the borders together.
Grahamstown is famous for that.
Yeah, especially with the text from the Xhosas later on.
Yeah.
But now we will discuss, if there's another discussion later on, not today, I mean in the future, I will discuss the interaction with the black tribes and the black people as well.
Yeah.
People who were the people they actually encountered, the Europeans. Who were the people they found here? And that was the San, and I just want to mention a few things. I don't want to expand too much, but that was the San and the Khoisan at the Cape. They were mostly present at the Cape area.
They were the First Nation people, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
I mean, they were there long before the Nguni and Bantu tribes came through from the
That's
northeast.
exactly the point I want to get to. The Bantu actually exists of the Nguni, the main group of Nguni that consists of the Xhosa, the Zulu, the Swati, and the Pondu and the Matabele.
Yeah.
And then the second main group is the Sotho, consisting of the Western Sotho, which is called the Tswana, the Southern Sotho, which lives in Lesotho, and then the Northern Sotho, the Pedi. Those were the two main groups, and then there's also a Venda, which is a small splinter group, actually originated from the Shona people from Zimbabwe.
Right.
But as the borders were determined and cut later on, they fell into South Africa, white South Africa.
I just want to say something, Hans, when we talk about the movement of the black peoples into South Africa or Southern Africa. That happened because they were being chased by other larger tribes. I mean, they were running away, and that's why they came south. It wasn't that they were deciding they were going to settle in South Africa. It was
No, not at all. You're quite right. I read a book written by the famous historian Gustav Preller. I'm not sure if you. This book was written in 1937, and there's a lot of valuable information there, casting a lot of light on the movements of the black people. Now he's got a map. There's a map in his book, and I think the map was done. That's the earliest map I could ever put my hands on.
Yeah.
And that map was drawn up in 1765.
Wow.
And on that map, it's clearly that there were only a few people occupying that land, and towards the south, towards the Cape, it was named Land der Hottentotten. Now, Hottentotten was a Khoisan, and the San was definitely always there, because the Hottentotten, as they were called, the Khoisan, is actually a mix between Egyptians and San people. But that we can discuss during a later discussion, specifically when we...
Now just for people who don't understand, the Khoi is a name given to the Hottentot people, who were rather like the Nguni people, where they used to have their cattle and they would try and settle in certain areas. They'd move a little bit, but the San were like nomads. They were moving all over the place. They were
moving all. The San was actually all over Africa. They even went over the Straits of Gibraltar to southern Europe.
Yeah.
So they were all over the place, and they were interaction between stray Egyptian soldiers. This is according to Gustav Preller in Somalia.
Okay. Wow.
And that's where the Khoi people, they were called Khoi. That's where they originated, and then they moved down and eventually ended up to the most southern tip of Africa.
Okay.
And they mostly settled around where what we call Cape Town today, in Saldanha.
Yeah.
And all those areas around that location.
Yeah.
So those are the people who was encountered firstly by Jan van Riebeeck when he landed at the Cape.
Right.
And they were also cattle farmers.
Yeah.
They had a lot of cattle, and they traded with the San people with cattle as well. So if we come back to the map in Gustav Preller's book, there was Land der Hottentotten. That's what we mentioned now with the Khoisan.
Yeah.
You see, the name Khoisan also tells you that the San is included. Khoisan. So they were very similar people with the same kind of language, with click-clack sounds. I think one has got 6 click-clacks and the other one 7. So it's very similar. They look very similar, but the Khoisan people were a bit larger in stature. So on that map is Land der Hottentotten mentioned, and also then the other large portion, the only other portion mentioned actually was Meno Motapa. Meno Motapa, that was
right in the middle where Gauteng is today.
Yeah, it's mostly east to the eastern part where Zimbabwe is laid, and further up.
Yeah.
Now Meno Motapa was a Shona king who owned a large land. Well, some people say it even went up to India. I'm not so sure about that, but it covered a lot.
Sounds a bit extreme, quite honestly. Anyway, go ahead.
But nevertheless, was a huge portion of land owned by the Shona. So if we can, look at it that way, the time the Europeans arrived in the 17th century, that was the land distribution. It's what it belonged to just by means of occupation.
Yeah.
It belonged to Khoisan and the others to the Shona. That's the main tribe in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
So there was no mention of any Bantu or any other Bantu tribes, not on that map. And some point of interest, the big waterfall, it was also mentioned there, long before Mr. Livingstone invented.
Yeah, Victoria Falls.
Waterfalls,
yeah.
It was also on the map, just sake of about 90 years before Mr. Livingstone arrived and discovered it. So that was the map. There's no sign of any Bantu, 1765 already. So according to the written history, by the time Jan van Riebeeck arrived at the Cape, these Bantu people have not even crossed the Zambezi River.
So they hadn't come into South Africa?
Not yet.
The current borders of South Africa. Yeah, okay.
The current borders of South Africa. Now, I went into, I did my best after I read some interesting facts in Gustav Preller's book. He mentioned that the black people were originally from Asia, and he mentioned the name by the place of Kafiristan in Europe, in Asia, where they originated from. And then he also mentioned it was called the Poort van Tranen, of tears. And that was Bob L. Mande. that was apparently at the time of a movement of a continent where a lot of these people drowned when they crossed the border between Asia and Africa at the time. So I've got two Oxford pocket dictionaries dating from the 30s, if I remember correctly. And there's, I don't want to mention the word, it's a K word, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it says inhabitants from Kafiristan in Asia. That's very interesting. So today it's called Nerostan.
Well, you know what? Look, just on that K word, the K word actually it's so misunderstood. All it means is a non-believer. That's what it means.
Yeah. There's a lot of connotation to that. Also, kafula from the Arabs and all of that.
Yeah.
Kafula is another. But that was very interesting. That word originated from the British, actually. It's in the Oxford Pocket Dictionary.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to get to, it's to me it's very clear that they originated from Asia. So they're not. I'm talking about Bantu people now, not Negroes and not the Shona people.
Yeah.
There are other different tribes which I could never find the time to investigate into all of it.
Right.
But the Bantu people in South Africa, they originated from Asia. So they are not indigenous.
So when you've got Julius Malema saying the whites stole the land from the blacks, he's talking a load of BS, is what you're saying.
That's nonsense. That is really nonsense. Well, we will discuss that in a next discussion.
Yeah, in another discussion.
But
so,
we
now,
see we're going.
Well,
but I just want to make it short.
Go ahead, and then we'll get back to the boers. Okay, carry on.
Yeah. I just want to mention in short that it's clear, and I also investigated the origin of the black people, and according to bones and skull patterns and all of that, and association, it's clear that they must have originated in Mongolia. It's also Asia. So there are all signs. Most of the signs. Predominating science indicates that they are not from Africa, they're not indigenous. With their cultures and language and habits, they all came with that from a different continent. So when they arrived in Northeast Africa, they met the Arabs, and we all know that the Arabs didn't really get along well with them.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, they said because they eat rotten meat and all of that, the Arabs were not very impressed with them. So the decision was either we enslave them or we wipe them out.
Yeah.
So then they fled to Western Africa where they encountered the Negroes, and the Negroes also were not very happy with them. And then they fled back, met the Arabs again, and then it got too hot for them, and then they started fleeing southwards, and that is how.
And can I just say, to bring this into context, we mentioned Dr. Livingstone earlier, and Dr. Livingstone was the one who professed absolute horror about the slavery that was taking place in East Africa, where the Arabs were using Zanzibar as their base, that's off Dar es Salaam, to actually traffic slaves, black African slaves, which were the Nguni Bantu people, back to the Middle East.
Exactly. So it was horrifying for them, the way they were treating the Arabs. It's all well known and part of history.
Yeah.
So when they decided to flee down in the horse, in the 17th century, somewhere they started moving over the Zambezi. And like the previous Prime Minister, John Foster, who was not one of my favorites, but I've got a video which I would like to send to you.
Yeah, please.
It is very, very enlightening. He was having an interview with an American presenter, and what he described was very accurate, according to my view, is that they were not forced, as the normal perception is that we forced them into areas. They were not forced. they decided, because they arrived there maybe a little bit in certain areas, a little bit before the white people, and this is the areas which they preferred to stay, and the rest were open. And when the whites arrived, the whites occupied these empty areas, and some other areas which were under the authorization of the black tribes. There were negotiations and trade.
Absolutely. Look at Peter Teeth with
Exactly.
Shaka.
So we will get there in the next discussion
Yeah.
in details of what happened with Peter Teeth.
No, we're so off the. We're supposed to be talking about the boers. Anyway, we'll get to the boers in a second. I just want to say that one of the reasons why the Bantu and Nguni people never came west of Lesotho was because it was too dry for them to herd their cattle. Their cattle couldn't survive because they didn't know about windmills, they didn't know about irrigation, they had no idea about this stuff. They were very basic, so they stuck to Natal where the rainfall was much higher. That's the only place that they actually inhabited. So when the Boers came in through the 1820s, 1830s into Free State and right up into parts of Natal, they didn't come across any Bantu.
No, it was mostly empty land. It was,
yeah.
But like you rightly say, towards the west, the country becomes drier and drier.
Yeah.
The Drakensberg is actually the watershed.
It is.
And to the east of the Drakensberg, it's very...
it's wet.
It's more like rainforest and all of that.
Yeah.
And the vegetation is much different. As you go towards the west, it becomes drier and drier, and eventually you get a desert. You get the Kalahari Desert and the Nama even further on. So that's true. So that you're quite correct. That's actually influenced the migration pattern, and that's where we settled as well. And I've had many discussions. I've been to 20 African countries. I've worked in 20 African countries. So I worked with a lot of tribes, and I had a lot of this because I've got a passion for this, for history, and what actually led to the way things worked out.
Yeah.
And what they always told me was they always stay close to the rivers, and that's true.
Oh, absolutely, because they're cattle.
Yeah, for the cattle. They never, because they had an open land to a large extent, and they could choose where to stay. So the best option was close to the rivers. So that's why we never developed a lot of skills as well in farming and in survival.
Hans, can I make a suggestion? You know, like with the modern white person, their dream is to have a house. You know, that's like the ultimate dream is to have a family home. Back then, the ultimate dream when it came to the Bantu and Nguni people was to have some cattle, because you could then buy a wife through Lobola. And I mean, that was the whole central aspect of it. The hut was nothing. It was just something you put up on the turf somewhere, but it was your cattle that was actually the whole center of your life, wasn't it?
Exactly. So different cultures, different backgrounds.
Different things that are of value. Yeah,
of course, definitely.
Yeah.
So on this black tribe issue, I just want to say one thing before we get back to the Boers and Afrikaners, is that they never really wanted, I don't think they never really wanted to get in conflict with the Boers. Some of them, there was a difference. The Ngunis were mostly hostile, and the Sothos were mostly friendly. And with certain Sotho tribes, we never had any conflict or war. We actually protected the Sotho against the Nguni, because the Nguni was busy with what we call the clean sweep, Mefakani or Difakani, differently Zulu and Xhosa and Sotho languages. But one fact which is really true is that the Boers never took one piece of ground from any black tribe. The only black tribe who was forced from land was the Matabele. And the Matabele was actually formed by Mosilikatsi Kumalu. He was a war lieutenant of Tengane.
Yeah.
And, the Zulu used to send their impies about 500 kilometers from Zululand to the Magaliesburg to take the cattle of the Sotho, and we killed the men as far as they could, and took the wives and women and children into the tribe. So that was called Mefakani, clean sweep.
Yeah.
And the Boers actually stopped that. They stopped that, and then peace came over the area. And then this Mtsilikatsi Kumalo, we fled from Shaka, the Zulu leader Shaka, because he kept some of that cattle behind. And Shaka, King Shaka, found out about it. And then he feared for his life, and he decided to flee, and then he moved eastward, southwestward rather. And then he entered the Tswana area. And he did the same. He carried on with Nefakane or Difakane in the same manner. So that was the last part of this. And he did the same. He actually took the Tswana women and children into his tribe, and it became the mixed tribe. Eventually about 20% Sotho, and Tswana, the Western Sotho, and 80% Zulu. And then at the Battle of Vegkop, you should be aware of the Battle of Vegkop. So he was out of his area now. He was entering Sotho area, and he was a traitor. Mtsilikatsi Kumalo was a tyrant. He actually just wiped out everything in front of him, and he got into conflict at Vegkop. And it's a long story. We can discuss it during the next discussion. And the voortrekkers, the boers, they won the battle, but Mtsilikatsi took all their cattle, so they couldn't pull their wagons. They didn't have milk for the children and all of that. And then Barolong, it was a Tswana tribe, actually assisted the boers by providing them cattle again to pull their wagons and to move on. And because of this action, this conduct, this tyrant, Mtsilikatsi Kumalo, the Tswana people were afraid of him. Even the Griqua, we can discuss the Griqua as well later on. He was like a colored group. All of them, they grouped with the Boers, and they eventually chased Mtsilikatsi over the Limpopo River to Zimbabwe, where they...
Can I just interrupt and say that I wrote the book on the Griqua people. Yeah. I wrote their history, and it's called Children of the Mist. And I know exactly what you're talking about. There's an amazing report in Robert Moffat's book. I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Moffat, the missionary.
Moffat, the father-in-law of Dr. Livingstone.
Exactly, yeah. But he had a...
Luchtenburg, his missionary at Luchtenburg.
No, Kuruman.
Kuruman, sorry.
Yeah, he had a mission station at Kuruman.
It's Kuruman.
Yeah, but he actually, with the Griquas, fought against Mzilikazi. And there's some incredible reports about how the Griquas, because they were riding on horses, were able to, with their guns, shoot into the Matabele and then retreat. And no one Griqua was hurt, and there were thousands of Matabele who were just basically killed during that battle. That was quite close to Kuruman. And Moffat talks about that. Now, look, we better get back to the Boers, because we're kind of way off the subject.
I was just trying to tell you that was the only black group which was ever forced from land in South Africa.
Yeah.
But they didn't belong there. They were intruders.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they were actually terrorizing the local black tribes.
Absolutely. They were.
So the Boers never stole any piece, any dime of ground from any black group. They protected the friendly ones against these tyrants and the hostile ones. That's the last point I want to make on that before we have to clear on that. And this is what we are always accused. We stole their land. That's
BS. We all know that's BS, but it's political correctness. And I just want to say that the only people who have had land stolen off them in South Africa are the Boer nation when it comes to the Transvaal and the Free State and through the Second World War. Okay. Now Now,
we can speak about 1913 Land Act and all of that to get carried.
yeah, sure. Okay, so let's get back to. Okay, so the Dutch set up the Cape. Britain, we've talked about, became involved in the late 1790s, early 1800s, and now you've got this split between the Cape Dutch, or the Afrikaners, and the Freeburgers. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, that came about, and like I said, it started with the uprising in Arantas's time, and then Slagtersnek Rebellion. That was the main events, which actually, created this separation between the two groups, and they realized they're not the same. And as it carried on, the British settlers were different. They really grouped well with the Boers. They defended the boundaries on the east frontier together. So they were very much on a friendly note. They were not considered by the Boers and the same type of people, the same mentality. The Cape Dutch people in the Cape and the British authorities. But there were a lot of British governors, about, let's say, 42 of them, I think, in total, who came to South Africa, and they came with different attitudes.
Oh, some of them were, like Harry Smith was a real prick, but anyway, carry on.
Yeah, and also the urban and all of that. The urban, maybe, but it depends on how we treated the Boers and how the Boers got along. And the conditions on the eastern frontier, the way we handled the Xhosa people and the conflict with the Xhosa people, eventually, there were good ones and bad ones, like we said, but eventually the bigger picture, and it culminated in the Boers not being happy. And by the time at 1856, the slaves were freed 1854. So we already discussed the reason why the Boers were not happy by the way, it happened, and that was still fresh in their minds as well.
Yeah.
And the conditions on the eastern frontier became unbearable. And at the time, there was a magistrate from Swedish descent, Andries Stockenström. I'm not sure if you've heard about him.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, he was the magistrate at the time. And he was in with the British. He was under the British authority and appointed by them. And he didn't treat the Boers well as well. And we were not happy with the way this Xhosa conflict was handled. And in a manifesto written by Retief, Peter Retief, who was the first guy who actually went on significant track with lots of people, more than 1,000. He wrote and sorry, I'm listening.
Peter Retief actually had a few properties in Grahamstown. I actually had one of his title deeds, so he had a property in people today, many Afrikaner people, they say he was a crook and a scoundrel. Yeah.
We defended it in the book of Gustav Preller by the title of Piet Retief, in Grote Voortrekker, something like a Dutch title.
Yeah.
He praised Piet Retief, and I trusted what Gustav Preller wrote because he was a very good historian.
Everything I've read, he was a great guy. I have absolutely no question about that.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I've got two books here written by other people about Piet Retief, and they went much more in detail on Piet Retief's conduct in Grahamstown and the surrounding area. Okay. There are two areas which I identified about Piet Retief. He was a very good protector of the people. His services on the borders defending against the Xhosa, he was excellent. And his conduct in Graham, he was also a contractor. He had a contract to build several buildings for the government in Graafrenet as well.
Right.
And that didn't go well. According to Gustav Preller in his book on Piet Retief, he actually tried to sugarcoat Piet Retief in a way because he was always busy with his services on the border, so he couldn't really attend to his contract. It was maybe a little bit soft on Piet Retief. If you read these two books, it's a whole different story. it seems that he was really a bit crooked in his ways, in his conduct, in transactions with other people. There was a lot of things against him.
Yeah.
So I agree on that. Facts seem to be sound. There's no way I wouldn't believe what was written in those books. So he had two sides. He had a good side in being a good protector of his people, and the other side was a bit murky. So that's my take on Peter Retief. But nevertheless, he was a good voortrekker leader.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, he took them right into. Well, Peter Maritzburg is named partly after him.
So there's a lot of controversial things about Peter Retief.
Yeah.
End of the day, he was a good leader. He had courage to take people to the frontier, to hinterland. But what he did with Tengane was totally wrong. He was warned. A little boy, James, named, I think it was Moore, his surname was Moore. He sang with Owen, the missionary at Nkunkundu.
Yeah.
He could understand and speak Zulu fluently, and he warned Peter Retief. And many people warned him, you shouldn't do what you're doing, don't trust Tengane.
Yeah.
And he didn't listen. So he was really responsible for his killing and 70 of his people, including his 12-year-old boy. So he was very, very wrong there. But in general, I wouldn't say he was a scoundrel. I think it's a bit harsh. But anyhow, the way he acted as well when they moved away from the eastern frontier in 1836, when the Great Trek actually started. His conduct was well respected, because even though it wasn't necessary, it was necessary maybe to write his manifesto to Andri Stockenstrom, where he explained exactly the reasons why we moved. And Stockenstrom wasn't happy, because these people actually supported his community. They were the main taxpayers, and they stabilized the area. So for that reason, Stockenstrom wasn't happy. And a couple of things which Peter Retief mentions is more than 1,000 of his people, the Boer people, were killed already. More than 350 houses destroyed and burned. Thousands pieces of cattle, sheep and cattle were stolen. So we just couldn't bear it anymore. So that's the main reasons he actually mentioned why we moved. And as they moved up, as they started encountering the black tribes, he always reported back to Stockenstrom. You know, I think it was a decent act. He always reported to him. So he seemed to be a person thorough in his conduct, and I couldn't find anything wrong in the way he led the trackers. It was just at the time he went to Tengane, at the end he messed up a bit. So this is why they started moving, and some other prominent voortrekker leaders follows. At the end of the day, eventually was about, over the next 4 years, about 6,000 people leaving the Cape and the frontier.
So now those people we could collectively call the Boers.
Yeah, we were not called Boers by the time. The first trackers who started moving out to the eastern frontier and moving northwards.
But later they were called the Boers.
Yeah, later. Maybe I should go a step or two back. The first people who started moving, and that was the first signs of the real separation between Afrikaners and Boers.
Exactly,
they were called the track Boers. And they actually established the republics small republics of Swellendam and Graaf-Reinet, for instance. They were the and then later on, with the Great Trek starting in 1856, they were called voortrekkers. And after establishing the first republic, Boer Republic was actually the Republic of Natalia. That was the first Boer Republic. We went all the way up to Natal, to the coast. After the Battle of Vegkop, for interest's sake, the place where I stay on a farm called Deelkraal, it means dividing. They settled there. There was a small setting, this old voortrekkers' graves on the farm just north of me. And when they lost about 9,000 pieces of cattle at the Battle of Vegkop, Masilikatsi Kumalu moved those cattle to Zeerust. where he stayed. He had a strong older Zeres and also Makapan, close to Groot Marico, Great Marico.
Right.
And the Boers sent two commanders twice to go and fetch that cattle. They actually got it back. They gained it back from Serikasi, and then they brought it to that place where I stay, when my farm is Deelkraal. It was named Deelkraal because they built a huge kraal in which they kept these cattle. And also at that specific place, most of the voortrekker leaders like Potgieter, even Charles Solier was there, Gerard Maritz was there, and even Andries Pretorius was there. Most of them, almost all of the significant voortrekker leaders were there. And there they decided where to trek, where to continue the trek. Potgieter always wanted to go to the north and not to Natal.
Yeah, that's where they had the divide. They went in different directions.
But they didn't. Potgieter actually agreed that they should go to Natal, and this is why they went to Natal at that stage. Potgieter wanted to go to the Sopans Mountains, Sopansberg, and eventually, there was a incident where they didn't listen to him, where Piet Uys, and Piet Uys was also present. Piet Uys and his son Dirkie were killed due to the reason it was a battle of, I think it was Italeni. They were killed in combat because they did not follow the advice of Potgieter, and then Potgieter was dubbed. He was named the fleeing commander, the vlug commander, because he did not stay there to defend them because they didn't listen to him. He was actually the more wise of all the voortrekker leaders in terms of strategy against the Zulu people in warfare.
Yeah.
And Andries Pretorius' commando was called the then commando after the Battle of Blood River.
Yeah.
So there at Deelkraal, they decided where they would go, and then they decided to go to Natal first.
Yeah.
And then we all know the fact that Piet Retief negotiated with Ngani, even signed a contract or a treaty, called treaty. And a fact of interest as well, with this period of Mefakane or Difakane, the Zulu actually extinct they wiped out all the tribes at the time in Natal. People always thought Natal belonged to Ngani.
And the original inhabitants, the Khoi and the San. Because if you go to the Drakensberg, there's a lot of Bushman paintings up there which date back to the times before the Nguni people came in.
The Bushmen were all over. Yeah. Even in the Kloof, where my grandmother was born, there was always also Bushman paintings there. And we can at a later stage also discuss the real original inhabitants of South Africa. According to Gustav Peller, it was not even the San. The San people was long before the Khoisan. It was not even the San. And most probably, according to what he observed at the time, in 1957, there was no internet and Google. So that's what I'm saying. I've got a lot of respect for him as an historian. He dug up a lot of interesting facts. And according to him, there were Europeans, most likely Germans, being involved in mining activities because there were certain...
Zimbabwe ruins.
Yeah, but not really the ruins. The mining activities, like at the mine close to Tabazimbi called Rooiberg. Okay. There was an old chain found, which was long before. It must have been Europeans, and the science and testing, carbon testing, carbon dating testing actually indicated it was long before the sun was even present in Africa. So that's a point of interest, and also signs of mining activities, which was very, very developed for time.
Hans, I want to put you in touch with Michael Tellinger. Have you heard of Michael Tellinger?
No, not really.
Michael Tellinger is a remarkable man. He's probably in his late 40s, early 50s, and he has... he has seen things in Mpumalanga where he lives, which, when you look at what he's saying, and talking about the early civilization, there have been civilizations predating the Bantu and Guni people coming through, and very, very structured civilizations. He's got some really interesting information. But look, I'll put you in contact with Michael so you can talk about that. But let's continue.
But I think that's a guy who is that not a guy who wants to link us to some alien activities.
No,
I've read a book.
No,
that's another guy.
No,
he also studied all these runes, and he links it to alien.
Michael's. Look, I had a live stream with Michael. In fact, I'll send you the link after this.
Okay.
We're talking about energy and the frequencies and things around life that we don't understand. It's really interesting. Okay, so let's get back. So we've talked about the treks. We've talked about the Great Trek. Let's get into the freedom wars that the Boers went through.
I would like to summarize. The first republic was Natalia. We know.
Yeah.
The British, after 4 years, 1842, annexed it again by at the Battle of Congela. So the Boers lost that newly found republic. Then they moved back. They moved back over Drakensberg. The wife of Reverend Smith, she was a sister of Gerard Maritz. She was a famous woman who said we would rather go barefoot back on the Drakensberg than to stay in Natal with the British again, because they wanted to flee away, to get away from the British. Now the British actually, took control of Natal again. They were not happy, so they didn't want to stay in the British rule again. So they moved back, and then a lot of smaller republics, which all actually culminated in the two main republics of the ZAR, the Transvaal, and the Free State.
Right.
So in 1881, this is actually in the 1850s, the British attempted, and they did, annex the Free State and the Transvaal, and that was defended in the 1880s with what is called actually the second freedom war. People consider that as the first one, but they neglect the fact that Natal was the first freedom war.
Right.
We lost. So we all know what happened in 1888. There were certain discussions with the British, and
they were packing with their tails between their legs.
Yeah, at 1881 with the Battle of Amayuba.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a very humiliating loss to the British. Maybe the first time ever in the history of the British Empire that they had a loss like that.
Yeah.
And that ended up with peace talks in 1881, and the Boers were rendered self-government, limited self-government. The foreign affairs were still handled by the British. So the next main event was the discovery of gold in the Witwatersrand.
That was the worst possible thing that could happen.
Yeah, that was actually good for the Boers, but it got them to lose their country.
Yeah, that's
eventually.
Right. Yeah, because the Rothschilds became involved.
Yeah, all the Rothschilds, and the English missionaries were sent, especially guys like the Phillips. He was a very well-known
Dr. John Phillips.
Yeah, Dr. John Phillips.
Yeah, that's way back in the 1820s.
Yeah, and I just want to give some background on in our discovery of the gold and minerals, because this London Missionary Society, I think it was Missionary Society.
Yeah, London Missionary Society was formed in 1796.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
They sent these missionaries under the smokescreen of bringing the word of God but the main issue at stake was actually the gold Menomotapa, like I mentioned before, Menomotapa. The mines close to the Zimbabwean ruins were also known as the mines of King Solomon, where Cleopatra apparently visited King Solomon. I'm not sure about that, but that's as the history goes. So they were very well aware of these valuable minerals, and that was the undercover. That was the main reason they actually came to Southern Africa, is to find the gold of Menomotapa. That's why the Boers never had any intention. See, that's the difference between Boers and the other groups. They are not hunting riches.
The Boers were farmers.
Yeah, the farmers. Yeah, they were religious people. Just want to make a decent living. According to their religion, and these other people were fortune hunters. So that's why the conflict actually started between the groups, because the English missionaries at Port Natal, which is today Durban at the time, and that's also actually part of the next discussion. When the Boers, Peter Tief in person, went to inform them that he had a meeting with Dengane and he granted the land of Natal to him, and he actually he tried to put them at ease and say, listen, we will not have any problems with you. We will live in peace, and we will, cooperate in all matters. These British missionaries were not happy at all. They were not happy because they were also there with a different agenda. And one of them, Gardiner, he was a previous ex-ship captain. He was retired, and he was the one actually who told Ngane to kill Peter Tief.
Wow!
Because
because he was a devil.
Yeah, because he said Peter Tief fled our king in Cape Town, and you know what you do if people fleeing from you? You kill them. By the way of starving. So I just wanted to get back in the history, just to explain that minerals was actually high on the list.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. It's interesting that Cecil Rhodes was sent to South Africa because he was so sickly by his family. And he actually had a little farm near Ekopo, which is in the southern part of the old Natal, or it's near the Amzimkulu River. And when the first diamonds were found at Kimberley, that's when he actually headed off to try and make his fortune. And the story behind how he got that support by the Rothschilds with that huge check to basically buy out all the other people, the stakeholders who had blocks on Kimberley. It's an extraordinary story. In fact, if you go to the museum at the Big Hole of Kimberley, you can actually see a copy of the check that was issued to Cecil Rhodes by Nathan Rothschild way back then in the sort of mid to late 1800s.
He was definitely involved, and the same thing repeated itself in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Rhodesia was named after it.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about the three freedom wars. Okay, so we've covered the two. Now, the third one, which was the mother of all atrocities, was the Boer War, 1899 to 1902.
Yeah, and so it's all fortune hunters actually came to South Africa, and it was very similar to the gold hunting in America at the time. And very similar. It actually lured all kinds of characters. A lot of Australians were here, and that was actually used by the British government to wangle themselves. Into this by using that as a smokescreen. The dissatisfaction of these foreign miners in conditions, and that forced Paul Kruger to have negotiations with him, and his famous words was when he had negotiations with Lord Milner at a stage, when he just stood up and walked out, and he said, it's not rights to vote or rights of these fortune hunters you want, it's my country you want.
Yeah.
Because he realized at the time, but it was actually not much he could do. He was fighting a huge British, strong British Empire. So he knew it was inevitable that eventually he would lose his country. He knew that from the start, but he tried his best to prevent it.
Yeah, but if you go back a few years before that with the Jameson raid, where they came from Afrikaner and tried to come in through Krugersdorp into to basically take over the Transvaal. I mean, that was a complete and utter flop. That was under Cecil Rhodes.
Yeah, it was backed by him, but then he was actually taken off as Prime Minister of the Cape.
He was. Yeah.
And Star Jameson was sentenced to death, but Paul Kruger showed him mercy.
Yeah.
So
just on that point, you raised something very interesting. So we're talking about the Afrikaners and the Boers. And the Afrikaners were dominated in the Western Cape, whereas the Boers dominated in these two states up in the north. Now, you say that Cecil Rhodes was basically, pissed off from his job because of what happened with the Jameson raid. So there must have been a fair amount of support back then for the Boers with the Afrikaners in the Cape.
Always. There was always support, and they were always actually on the same side, the Afrikaners and the British, always.
And I'm saying not Afrikaners and British. I'm talking about the Afrikaners and the Boers, because you had Cecil Rhodes being thrown out as Prime Minister in the Cape after the failed Jameson raid, which was aimed at taking over the two states from the Boers. So surely it was the Afrikaners back in the Cape who would have been saying, "Get the hell out of here," to Cecil Rhodes.
Sure, I think it was just like showcasing, I think it was only a strategic move. I don't really think they had anything against what Jameson was planning. I think it was just a strategic move to show that, to try and prove that they approve of it. But later on, they were very hostile, openly.
Yeah.
Scott, I just want to, we got load shedding, and my Wi-Fi is not working, so I'm on mobile data. I bought some data. I just noticed that it's almost running out.
Okay.
What would you suggest? Should we
Shall we just talk very quickly about 1994? What happened there with the Afrikaners and the Boers and the Broederbond and the Freemasons, all these sort of things? You want to just quickly take us? I know it's complex, but take us through.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think my data will run. I think it's already more than 80% used. And I would really like not to rush that discussion. I think it's very important. Okay. Can we maybe do that during the next discussion?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, because I don't want to leave gaps. I would like to carry on as from the Boer War, because that's very significant time, because that's the only time afterwards, because with the track, the Afrikaner actually lost touch with the Boers, and the Afrikaner, since early times in the Cape, they always wanted to dominate the Boers and cast some coating on them. They want to smother them.
Yeah, well, look, I tell you what I'm going to suggest is, how about we use this as one live stream, and I'll call it part 1, and then we'll do part 2 as a separate one, where we move into post-Boer Wars. Yeah.
Like continuity with this. Because when the Boers moved out, they actually lost touch, Afrikaners. They couldn't get hands on the Boers. But it changed after the Boers lost the war. Then they got full grip. They had full grip in political power and a lot of our areas. They actually, it was total devastating for the Boers, and now the Afrikaners got the opportunity to get a good grip on them. So I would like to start there.
Yeah, let's do that in part 2.
Yeah. No, I
Okay.
really didn't want to rush that one.
Yeah, sure. Hans, look, thank you so much for joining me. And look, I look forward to part 2. I'll get Marlena to set up a date for that, and it'll be very quick, so that we have them one after the other. But
Yes.
yeah, look, I'll be running this for part 1 on Wednesday night,
Okay. At 8 p.m. you say.
8 p.m. Johannesburg time. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Okay, Hans, take care, and great to meet you.
Thanks. Same to you. Keep well.
Okay, bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, guys, that was part 1 of the series. I think we're actually going to be looking at 3 live streams with Hans, because he's got a very interesting perspective on this whole debate about, and I see a comment by Petruza saying, what's this between the Afrikaners and the boers? I thought they were the same, and no, they're not. They have a very different history, very different culture. It's an intriguing area, and in part 2 of this history of South Africa, talking about the cultural differences, we'll be looking into that. So watch out for part 2 of this. All right, I'm going to wrap this live stream up now. I'm going to go out with Hier bly ek boer. But before I do, I just want to say thank you to the moderators for looking after the side chat and keeping everything nice and clean. Have a great evening, and don't forget, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time, we have another live stream on another topic. And if you want to know what that topic is, you're going to have to go to lovinglifetv.com. And if you want our daily email, which has all the new links and all the new information and news we put up there, mainly South African related, just register on Loving Life TV and also subscribe for the daily email. If you don't get the daily email, you can go to the home page of Loving Life TV, and right at the top you'll see there's a little link that says daily email. It's normally in there in fact it is always in there by midday South African time. So you can get the latest update from that link. Take care, guys, and here comes Hier bly ek boer. Have a great evening. Bye for now.
Meer as 61.000 van ons voorvaders het op die grens vir ons gesterwe, sodat ons vry kan wees. Die is my land, die is my reg, hier is ek boer. Van stof is ek gemaak en sal ek terugkeer. Die Bybel is die woord waaruit ek leer, soos die grond op die aarde. Hier bly ek boer. Soos diep in die nacht sal die vyand kom, maar hier bly ek staan en ek draai nie om, want jy maak my nie bang nie. Hier bly ek boer. Die is my land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my dood, my sweet, my reg. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voer. Hier bly ek boer. Asem in die somer wat vreugde bring. My oupa wat mannetjie roep kon sing, soos hy stap deur die lande. Hier was hy boer. My wortels lê diep in die grond geplant. My siel soos my pa los ek vir jou die land, en jy hoef nie te vrees nie. Hier sal jy boer.